20 years ago, the world changed forever when a devastating tsunami wiped out hundreds of communities, killing 230,000 people, including 26 Australians. For the survivors, the families who lost loved ones, and the first responders who raced into the danger zone, it's a day etched in their memories, not only because of the horror, but because of the heroism as well.
You're a rag doll. That's the best way I can describe it. You've got no control of where you end up.
There were squares in the water, hundreds of squares, and that's where houses have been, and they were underwater now.
There was lots of possibilities, all the way from war had broken out to it had been a tsunami.
We thought at first that it couldn't be real.
A tsunami travels at 800 kilometres an hour. So, I mean, that's the speed of a jet.
And it doesn't come like a wave, it is like the sea has risen up. At its peak, some say it's 50 metres high.
It was just another beautiful day in Phuket.
Boxing Day 2004.
Well, the day started with breakfast at the hotel, and so we went out and we were beachfront.
It's packed with holidaymakers like Joe Jardina, wife Ivana, and their 16-year-old son, Paul.
From the first day that he arrived, just totally special. Down syndrome with special qualities.
At first, Joe didn't think much of the slow, rising waters.
Then when I realised it wasn't going to stop, that's when I said to Paul, "Come on, Paulie, let's go. We're going to get wet here." I'm still not feeling threatened. Got to a point where I thought, okay, it's going to hit us. So put him up against the concrete pillar, wrapped my arms around him and the pillar, thinking I'd just be able to hold him here. But as soon as it hit us, the force was so incredible. It picked us up and threw us over the wall. Something hit me on the back of the head, and I went under, and that's when I lost him.
We looked at the ocean and it started to sort of boil, and then there was shouts on the boat as the boat itself started what it looked like to be dragged under the water.
Liz Hill, then 21, had been diving with her dad.
We went down and there were no fish. We were surprised. There was no fish, there was nothing really. And we sort of looked at each other and said, we're going to go back up because there's nothing to see here.
Liz was rescued by a Navy boat, incredibly her second brush with death.
I had been recovering from a accident. Earlier that year, I fell off a train in Thailand and I fractured my skull, lost 1.5 years of my memory, and broke over 30 bones. And my dad watched me just sink deeper and deeper into a depression. And he said, "Liz, let me take you back there."
When I woke, I was found on the 3rd floor in the stairwell of the hotel, head down and facing down. So in other words, my feet were up on the steps.
It saved Joe's life with the water draining from his lungs. He was in such a bad way though, first responders didn't think he'd make it.
They were prioritising and you know, I could understand why they were doing that. They didn't think I was going to make it, and they moved on to the next person. But then the 3rd time I was taken to the hospital. I had some surgery on my hand. That was done at the reception desk because no theatres available.
Joe was reunited with wife Ivana.
So there was, you know, that moment of absolute joy knowing that Ivana was well. But then, of course, you know, we don't know where Paul's gone.
Yeah, we'll search and do whatever we've got to do, but I'm not sure what the outcome's going to be.
3 days later, they found Paul's body.
I was the first Australian law enforcement officer to arrive into Phuket. I remained so for about 30 hours before specialist officers arrived from Australia.
Australian Federal Police Detective Superintendent Melissa Northam was based in Bangkok when the tsunami hit.
Once we got to Phuket Airport, we were faced with what can only be described as just sheer chaos.
Soon, 300 Australian law enforcement officers joined her.
At home, Boxing Day for our family is probably just as important as Christmas Day.
Retired AFP officer Mick Travers was in charge of the disaster victim identification team, speaking with A Current Affair in 2004.
For Mick Travers and his body identification colleagues from the Australian Federal Police, the past month has been a blur.
Where we've come in just over a month has been absolutely incredible. We had a case of a Frenchman who would come to our mortuary every day looking for his daughter and his wife who were washed away. Fortunately, he and his other daughter survived, but day after day he'd come back and just come and ask us if there was any process. And I do know that eventually both his daughter and his wife were identified. And as much as you can only imagine the pain that he suffered, at least we were able to give him something.
2,500 bodies were brought to the makeshift mortuary Mick was manning.
We actually had some carpenters build some shelving, put them into refrigerated 20-foot shipping containers, and about 40 of those became our mortuary.
By New Year's Eve, the enormity of the disaster was sinking in.
We'd all stopped working, and the Thai people let the lanterns, which they do every year, but this just had something different about it, and they lit these light lanterns with candles, and there was just a real eeriness where we all just stopped and these lanterns just went into the sky.
Hours earlier, Joe and wife Ivana were evacuated home without Paul.
You think about it every day. I mean, the loss of a son, it's with you every day. You learn to live with it, but you don't forget.
Somebody comes into your life, kills you with love, and then goes, and just gets taken away.
This is Paul's mum Ivana speaking with ACA days after the tsunami.
Everything around my house revolves around Paul, his billiard table.
This is a very, very special part of the house for us because he spent a lot of time on the billiard table. As soon as it was assembled and ready to be used, he said to us, "Get out. It's mine."
We knew that this was going to be a really long process and that we weren't going to have the answers for everyone straight away. And as it did, it was nearly 2 years before we were able to hand over to the Thai authorities.
I was actually, my first ever news bulletin in television was that day, and I was preparing to present the late evening news. The initial reports were something bad had happened. We didn't know how bad, of course, but the first pictures actually came out of Thailand because it had lots of Western tourists who had access to video cameras.
9 News reporter Brett McLeod was sent into Banda Aceh. As
we're driving along the main road from the airport, there was a field about the size of a soccer pitch, and there was a grader like one they used, to make construction, and the digger was holding up. I could see bodies on top of the scoop, and then it tipped it into the hole, and then I guess a dozen, maybe 20 bodies fell out.
But it's this encounter Brett will never forget.
Among the many young faces here, 9-year-old An stood out when we asked him where his family was.
Sendiri.
"I'm alone," he says. He hasn't seen his parents or siblings since climbing up a tree to escape the tsunami.
Someone else came on a boat and picked him up and then took him to this refugee camp. And he'd lost everyone. And to this day, I hope that somehow his family made it back.
Now that little boy would be almost 30.
I hope wherever he is now, he's doing well because he's just a special kid.
Amid the horror, incredible acts of heroism.
They were ordinary people, but yet they were doing extraordinary things. normal people had been recovering deceased and putting them into their own vehicles to try and get them to the mortuary sites.
So I think everyone really did want to pitch in and help. And that was wonderful. That made me feel proud, as did when the Howard government said they would give $1 billion in donations and loans to Indonesia.
When I woke up the next day, someone had taken the time to put a blanket over me and a fresh set of clothes just laid over the top of me. And I really saw that even though these people had lost everything, that they still had the humanity to see somebody that needed clothing and share that. And I don't think I'll ever forget that generosity.
2 decades on, Liz has channeled her darkest days into hope, working as a psychotherapist to help others.
I view the event as a second chance at life, a second possibility.
Around 230,000 lives were lost, 26 Australians.
We need to understand that we're only in transit here. And life will throw its challenges.
I just don't take life too seriously anymore because you just never know when things might change.
It is something that we'll all hold together in our hearts forever.
Yes, something we will never forget.